Montana Territory, 1882. The wind carried grit across the Wagon Trail, sharp as needles, but she did not move. Georgia Orwood stood at the edge of the dusty road, brown skirts tugged by the breeze, her arms wrapped around two children tucked close to her sides. Her lips were chapped, her eyes dull with exhaustion, but she kept them fixed east, waiting for anyone. A wagon creaked into view just after noon, pulled by a pair of tired-looking bays. The man driving it was alone. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a trail-worn duster, and an expression that said he had seen too much and still kept going. Georgia stepped back, unsure, but her boy coughed a dry, rattling sound and she tightened her grip on him. The wagon slowed. The man pulled the reins gently and looked down from the seat. "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" he asked. She hesitated. "I was told there'd be a freight wagon passing through to take me and the children east." The man's gaze shifted. He saw the girl no more than 7 and the boy maybe 5. "Both thin, both quiet, you Georgia Orwood?" he asked. She nodded. "They left yesterday. Storm rolled in near Flathead Pass, turned them around. No one else headed that way for a while." She stared at him, her face blank. Then she looked down at her children. "We cannot stay here." The man took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "The name's Lawson Abner," he said. "I have a cabin about an hour north. You and the kids can ride with me just until you figure out your next move." Georgia looked at the wagon, then at her children. "We won't be trouble." Lawson gave a slight shrug. "You do not have to leave." It was quiet on the ride. The boy, Caleb, curled against Georgia's side. Clara, the older one, sat up straight, eyes alert. Georgia watched the land roll by, dry fields giving way to pine and firs, the mountains rising in the distance. Her jaw was tight. She had trusted one man before Caleb's father, and he had left them in Idaho with nothing but a broken wagon and a promise he never meant to keep. Lawson's cabin sat tucked between trees, smoke curling from the chimney. He helped Georgia and the children down, then grabbed a bucket and headed for the well without a word. Inside, the place was clean but simple. A cot against the wall, a hearth still warm, a rifle leaned by the door. Georgia stood still, unsure what to do. "You can take the bed," Lawson said when he returned. "I will sleep near the fire." "I do not want to inconvenience you," she said. He met her eyes. "You and your little ones need rest more than I do." That night, Clara slept first. Caleb crawled into the bed beside her, his small hand clinging to his mother's fingers. Georgia sat for a long time by the fire, watching the flames move. Lawson sat across from her, his arms resting on his knees. "Where were you headed?" he asked quietly. "Wherever would take us," she replied. "I was hoping to find work in Wyoming, maybe a place to stay, just need to keep the children warm this winter." "You got family?" "No," she said, "not anymore." The fire crackled. Lawson's gaze held hers. "Then you have me," Georgia blinked. "You do not even know me." Lawson's voice was low. "I know what it is to be left behind." They sat in silence. Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, the warmth of the fire reached between them. The next morning, Georgia woke to the smell of coffee and biscuits. The children were still asleep, their faces soft and peaceful. She walked into the main room and found Lawson at the stove. "You did not have to do all this," she said. He glanced over. "I know." They ate quietly. Clara helped clear the plates. Caleb sat on Lawson's knee as he told him about the horses outside. That afternoon, Georgia followed Lawson out to the barn. He showed her the feed, the tack, the chickens he kept behind the shed. She rolled up her sleeves and helped without asking. He did not stop her. "You know your way around a farm," he said. "My father raised cattle in Missouri." "Before the war," Lawson nodded. "Mine too, Arkansas." There was a pause. "You are not married?" she asked. "No," he said. "Was once. She died 6 summers back. I am sorry." He looked at her, something soft behind his eyes. "So am I." That night, Georgia sat at the fire again. This time, Lawson brought her a blanket and sat closer. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. "I was," she said, "but I do not know any more." He turned his head toward her. "You do not have to leave." She searched his face. "You hardly know me." "I know enough." Georgia looked away, then back at him. "What if I stayed, just for a little while?" Lawson's voice was steady. "You can stay for as long as you want." Georgia nodded slowly. Her hands rested in her lap, but she did not move them when Lawson's hand brushed hers. She let it stay there, warm and solid. The firelight flickered across their faces. Outside, the snow began to fall. The snow kept on through morning, laying a clean hush over the trees and roof. Georgia stepped outside with a shawl around her shoulders, boots crunching through the fresh layer. She watched Clara help Caleb pour cracked corn into the chicken trough. Their breath fogged in the chill. Lawson was splitting kindling by the shed, his sleeves rolled, the axe rising and falling with steady rhythm. She moved toward the fence, resting her hands on the top rail. "Children don't seem to mind the cold," she said, not looking at him. Lawson set aside a split log. "They're making themselves useful. You raised them right." "I raised them careful," she said. "Right's harder to say." He leaned the axe against the wall and brushed snow from his gloves. "You think you'll still head east come spring?" Georgia didn't answer right off. "I haven't made up my mind." "I don't know what's waiting out there." Lawson came to stand beside her. "Sometimes there ain't much waiting anywhere, just what you build." She looked over at him. "And you built all this on your own." "The land was my brother's," he said. "He never made it back from Virginia. I took it over, kept it going for his sake. Must be quiet, living up here alone." He glanced toward the woods. "It is, but I got used to quiet, doesn't ask much of you." Georgia let her gaze linger on the horizon. "I never liked it." "Silence makes it easier to remember things you'd rather forget." Lawson nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "Found this a few days ago in the ledger. It's a survey map from town. They're offering parcels near the river bend for anyone willing to clear it." She studied the paper, then looked up. "You want to sell this place?" "No," he said, "but I could use help with the work. 2 hands aren't enough." "Not if I aim to take on more. You offering me a stake?" "I'm offering you a place," he said, "if it suits you." Georgia folded the paper slowly and handed it back. "You don't even know if I can clear land. I saw the way you fixed the chicken coop latch yesterday. Careful hands. That's all I need." She turned from him then, walked back toward the house. Clara had just gathered the eggs in a tin pail, her cheeks pink from the cold. Georgia brushed a loose strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Bring those in, warm them by the hearth." Inside, the fire was steady and the kettle simmered. Georgia took her mending from the corner basket, wool socks whose heels had worn through. She worked the needle through without looking up when Lawson came in. "I'll be riding to town tomorrow," he said. "Need to trade for salt and lye. If you want to send word to anyone, I can carry it." She didn't answer at once. "No one's waiting to hear from me." He nodded, then pulled a chair closer to the hearth and sat. The children ate bread and jam at the small table. Caleb offered Lawson the crusts, which he accepted with a quiet thank you. Later, after the children were asleep, Georgia remained seated with her hands wrapped around a tin cup. Lawson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You said you didn't like silence," he said. "I don't," she replied. "Then tell me something true." She looked at him, unblinking. "I used to sing, not for people, just to myself. I stopped after Missouri." Lawson didn't press her. "Reckon the house could use a voice in it again." She exhaled, almost a laugh, but not quite. "What would I sing about here? Trees and snow?" "Could be," he said. "Could be about staying too." She set the cup down, her fingers trailing the rim. "I haven't stayed anywhere in a long time." "I know," he said. Their eyes met, nothing hurried in it. Just a long look held between them, the kind that settled deeper than words. Georgia rose and walked back to the room where the children lay. She pulled the blanket higher on Caleb, tucked Clara's braid behind her ear, then turned and closed the door softly. Lawson was still sitting near the fire. She came back, slower this time, and sat beside him. The fire threw soft light over their faces, and the space between them felt smaller now. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know." He looked at her, quiet and sure. "You don't have to leave." This time she didn't answer with words. She reached for his hand. It was calloused and warm, and he didn't let go. By late February, the snow had begun to recede, pulling back in thin patches from the southern slopes and leaving behind slick earth and the smell of thaw. Mud thickened around the barn, and the creek behind the house ran louder now, fed by meltwater from the high places. Georgia was in the lean-to behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, her hands raw from scrubbing linens in cold water. Her fingers burned, but she didn't stop. Clara stood a few steps away, hanging the wet fabric on a line stretched between 2 poles. The girl worked quietly, her motions practiced. It was the first morning Georgia hadn't had to ask her to help. Lawson returned from the ridge trail just past midday, his boots heavy from the climb. He led the mare into the yard, her flanks damp with sweat. Georgia looked up from the basin but didn't speak. Lawson tied the reins and walked over, drawing a folded cloth from his coat. Found this wedged under the bluff rock. Looks like someone dropped it on the trail last fall, stitched initials and all. Could be worth mending. Georgia wiped her hands on her apron and took the cloth. It was a child's cap, wool and worn thin at the crown. The letters were small and uneven but clear, C.O. She held it a moment too long before folding it. It belonged to Caleb. He must have lost it before we left Coeur d'Alene. I never thought we'd see it again. Lawson didn't ask how it had ended up there. He just nodded once. You want me to patch where it's worn? I'll do it, she said. Thank you. Inside, the floor creaked under her steps as she moved to the hearth. Clara and Caleb played nearby, stacking kindling into shapes. She watched them a moment before setting the cap aside. That evening, Lawson brought a sack of dried beans to the table and spread them out to sort. Georgia joined him, picking out the stones. The children had gone to bed early after a long walk to gather sapwood for kindling. The cabin was quiet but not empty. Lawson didn't look up when he asked, "You ever think about what you want, now that you aren't running?" Georgia's fingers paused over a split bean. "I don't think I'd know how to want something and believe it could stay." He leaned back slightly, brushing the sorted pile aside. "I've been thinking about planting barley. There's a patch of ground past the north fence that holds sun well. Could be enough to bring in a little trade." "That's good land," she said. "I saw it the day I helped dig the drainage trench." Lawson tilted his head. "Would you help seed it when the time comes?" She met his gaze. "You're already sure there'll be a spring." "There's always a spring," he said. "The hard part is deciding what you'll do with it." Georgia looked down at her hands. "I want quiet that doesn't ache. I want to stop thinking about what I'll have to leave behind." He didn't speak for a while. Then, "You won't have to leave anything, not unless you choose to." Later that week, Georgia took the children into the woods behind the creek. She showed them how to shape kindling from dry twigs, how to tell which bark would burn fast and which would smoke. Caleb climbed onto a fallen log and shouted to hear his voice echo. Clara traced her fingers along a mossy rock, eyes wide. When they returned to the cabin, Lawson was at the workbench, shaping a yoke from a cut of pine. The smell of sawdust filled the air. He glanced up, his face softening. "You look like you belong out there," he said. Georgia untied her scarf. "It's the first place I didn't feel watched." That night, as moonlight sifted through the window slats, Georgia sat on the edge of the bed she shared with the children. They were asleep, their breathing slow and even. She rose carefully, barefoot, the floor cool beneath her. Lawson was still awake, sitting at the table with a ledger open, scratching figures in pencil. He looked up when she entered. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About what I want." He waited. "I think I want to stay," she said. "Not just for the season. For as long as the sky keeps turning." Lawson stood slowly. "So do I." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. His hands didn't reach for hers. He waited. "I don't know how to be someone else's," she said. "Not anymore." "You don't have to be," he said. "Just be yours. And let me be near it." Georgia looked at him, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. "Then I'll stay." Lawson nodded once, like a promise made to the earth itself. And when he took her hand, he did it gently, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to hold something without breaking it. The earth warmed slowly that spring, softening under boots and hooves alike. Runnels of meltwater crisscrossed the field behind the cabin, and the trees shook off their frost with a sound like sighing. Georgia spent her mornings in the soil past the root cellar, kneeling to press seeds into damp furrows while Caleb picked stones and Clara watched for crows. Lawson had plowed the upper stretch with the draft team 2 days before, and the lines he cut stayed straight, even where the ground fought back. One evening, after the firewood was stacked and the hens bedded, Georgia found Lawson fitting a new leather strap to the bridle. He was seated on the porch step, sleeves pushed up, a faint scrape along his jaw from the day's work. "Something wrong with the tack?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Just didn't like the way it sat on her neck. Figured I'd rework it before we start hauling lumber." Georgia leaned against the post. You still thinking about raising the second barn wall? Been thinking about it for 2 years, he said. Figure with your help it might actually get done. He paused, then added, You ever thatch a roof before? I've patched one, she said. Back in Kansas, used willow branch and straw. It held. He nodded once and set the bridle aside. You and the children, are you feelin' settled now? Georgia studied the yard. The garden rows had taken shape, the fencing stood straight, and the children had stopped asking where they'd go next. I think we are, she said. But I'm still learning how to believe in stillness. Lawson stood and wiped his hands on his trousers. Then we'll build slow, nothing rushed. Later that night, the rain came in light, steady sheets. The cabin roof held, but the air inside turned cool, and Lawson kept the fire fed until it glowed low and even. Georgia sat at the table, sewing a button to one of Clara's dresses. The children, already asleep, murmured faintly in the next room, curled beneath a quilt stitched from old feed sacks. Lawson poured water into 2 tin mugs and passed one across the table. I've been thinking, he said, about the mill south of the ridge. Fellow who runs it is getting on in years. If I offered him a fair price, he might let it go. Georgia sipped carefully. You thinking of buying it? Not for me, he said. For us, you've got good sense for numbers. I've seen your ledgers. She lowered her cup. You trust me with that? I already do. She traced the rim of the mug with one thumb. We'd need more hands. Someone to help with the haul, at least. There's a widow in town with 2 grown sons. They've been looking for steady work since their uncle lost his grazing lease. I could speak to them next time I go in. Georgia nodded. If we're going to make a life here, we'll need to think beyond the land. Lawson looked at her for a long moment. That what you want, a life here? She didn't look away. Yes, with you. He set down his mug. Then I'll build the second room. Georgia smiled, slow and quiet. I'll help. The next morning they walked the stretch behind the barn, measuring ground with pace and eye. Lawson marked corners with stakes. Georgia held the twine taut while he tied it, her fingers brushing his. Neither of them pulled away. When the sun rose high, Clara brought out bread and dried apple. Caleb sat on a barrel, watching his mother drive a stake into the corner with steady hands. You think we'll stay here forever? He asked softly. Georgia looked up at him. That's the plan. Lawson shaded his eyes and added, Only thing that'd change it is if your mama changed her mind. Georgia didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on her apron, then walked over and stood beside Caleb. I've made up my mind, she said. We're not going anywhere. Lawson reached for her hand, dirt under his nails. She let him take it. They stood like that for a long while, the 3 of them under the wide Montana sky, with the land stretching quiet and patient in every direction. By early May, the second room was nearly finished. Lawson had framed the walls, and Georgia had helped cut the window opening herself, measuring each board twice before driving the nails. Clara and Caleb had started sleeping in the new space even before the roof was fully shingled, their laughter muffled through the rough sawn planks, soft as bird chatter. Georgia stood at the stove one morning, stirring cornmeal into a bubbling pot. The children were outside gathering wild greens. Lawson sat nearby, working a new handle into the drawknife. You ever think about what it would have looked like, she said without turning, if all this had happened sooner? He set the drawknife down. I used to. Not much anymore. She ladled the mush into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. I only ask because I'm not used to having something that doesn't feel like it's borrowed. Lawson twisted the bowl a little between his hands. I think about what's ahead more than what's behind. I want to see Caleb learn to saddle a horse without help. Watch Clara try her hand at bookkeeping if she takes to it. Georgia sat across from him. She copies your ledger when you're not looking, keeps it folded in her apron. That made him smile faintly. Then I better keep mine tidy. Later that day, they walked the edge of the barley field. The shoots were barely taller than a boot heel, green and certain. A pair of plovers darted over the far fence line, and Georgia stopped to watch them fly. I got a letter from the county office last time I went into town, Lawson said, pulling a folded page from his coat. They're offering to sell the mill outright. No payments, just a clear deed and the obligation to keep it running. Georgia read it quickly, then folded it again. It's fair. You want to take it? I do, he said, but only if you'll run it with me. She looked up sharply. You mean it? I wouldn't ask otherwise. Georgia nodded slowly, the wind brushing her face. Then let's do it. Together. That night, she stitched a new dress for Clara by lantern light while Lawson sorted the last of the seed grain. The cabin smelled of pine resin and beeswax. You planning on going into town again soon? She asked. Day after tomorrow. Clerk wants me to sign the deed in person. She hesitated, then said, if you're going, I'd like to come with you, not for the signing, just I'd like to be seen there, with you. He looked up. Are you certain? I am. The trip took them most of the morning. They hitched the wagon behind the team and rode in silence, both children nestled in the back with a quilt and a basket of dried pears. Georgia wore her cleanest dress, and Lawson had trimmed his beard that morning with the carefulness of a man who'd taken time to get it right. Town was dusty and loud, but not unkind. A few men tipped their hats when they passed, and Mrs. Eaton from the general store came out to greet them, her apron dusted with flour. You're the one with the red chickens, aren't you? She said to Georgia. My cousin saw them out past the ridge, said they were the cleanest he's seen. Georgia nodded, unsure, but the woman just smiled. Well, it's good to see you in town. You're staying out at the Abner place. I am, Georgia said. We all are. Mrs. Eaton glanced at Lawson, then back at Georgia. Well, that's good. In the afternoon, while Lawson signed the deed, Georgia took the children to the seamstress's stall and let Clara choose a bolt of calico. Caleb tugged at her hand and pointed to a tin horse in the window of the mercantile. His eyes were wide. Not today, she said gently, but maybe next time. On the ride home, as golden light stretched low across the grass, Georgia reached for Lawson's hand where it rested on the seat between them. He laced his fingers through hers without a word. A week later, they opened the mill for its first day under their name. The gears turned slow and steady, and Georgia kept the books while Lawson ran the belt and checked the stone. Clara swept the entry floor twice without being asked. Caleb made friends with a boy whose father brought in rye from the South Bend. That evening, Georgia stood beside the new room, a length of muslin in her hands, ready to hang it for a curtain. Lawson joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. You think we'll need more space someday? She asked. He looked around the yard, at the smoke rising short from the chimney, at the way the barley caught the last of the sun. Maybe, but I think we've got enough for now. She turned to him, voice quiet. You've given us a home. He stepped closer, resting a hand at the small of her back. No. You made it one. Their kiss was simple, sure, nothing rushed or uncertain. The kind that came after work was done, when the ground was soft and the air still carried the smell of cut wood and new leaf. They married in late June beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Mrs. Eaton brought a cake wrapped in cloth. Clara wore the calico she'd picked out herself. Caleb stood tall beside Lawson, proud in a too large vest. Georgia didn't wear white. She wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn with her own hands, and when Lawson took her hand, she didn't shake. I never thought I'd be able to trust someone again, she said low, where only he could hear. You don't have to, he replied. You just have to live it with me. And she did. They ran the mill together through dry years and wet ones. The children grew strong in the rhythm of it, learning when to speak and when to listen, when to work and when to rest. Georgia sang again, not often, but sometimes soft, wordless things while she cleaned the mill floors or folded the linens after washing. Lawson never asked for the words. He just listened, and the quiet that filled their home no longer ached, it held.